Hello, hello, testing. Can everybody hear me?
Good evening. I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
So
You
we
just
already how time flies. We'll give the others a few more moments. Okay, I'll start taking the register with who we have. I see we have Letitia is here. Are you still there, Letitia?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then we have Monique.
Good evening, all.
Hi, Monique. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Right, another week.
Yes.
Way to go, way to go. Okay. The other person in the room is Shaniqua. Shaniqua, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Hi, Shaniqua. How are you?
I'm good.
Wonderful, wonderful. I guess your colleagues are speeding to the computer somewhere, trying to set up. I'm just holding a little bit so certain things I don't have to say too often. That one or two other persons come in who will be joining us, hopefully. By the way, how is the studying going for next week? Not going?
Very good. I have two questions.
Two questions, yes. Number one,
Number one, can you share with us the makeup of the midterm exam, like multiple choice short answers?
yeah,
That
yeah. The midterm exam is going to be made up of two primary parts. One, you will have to define some terms. I call it definitions. So I would ask you, for example, to define what is auditing, what is sampling, what is an error, what is fraud, things like that. Stuff that you should know. Okay. I promise I won't find the most difficult definitions just to tie you up. They should be things, they will be things that you should know. Right. So you'll have about 10 or 15 definitions. And by definitions, I don't mean you need to come up with a long answer. If I ask you to define a word or a phrase, please just as short as you can in terms of answering the question. Then after that, you will have a series of what I call short answer questions. So I will ask you to list the audit principles, list the job objectives. Out of 7, name 3, things like that, just to see if you've made a commitment to the material. Okay, so that's basically what you will have. I might throw in a couple of true false questions in there just to change things up. But those are the 2 key types of questions that you can expect to get. Okay. For example, if I were to ask somebody what are audit working papers, what would you tell me? Don't complicate it, just keep it simple but to the point. What are audit papers?
Are those the notes of the auditors?
Yeah, that's the notes made by the auditor about what they did, so that if somebody challenges them later, they'll be able to pull out their notes and say, hell no, we did this, 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 and this. We found this, 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 and this. You do not have any proof of what you're saying. We have evidence. That's what the audit notes are about. Okay, simple as that. Or I might ask you, what is the purpose of audit working papers? And if anybody looked at the purpose, and I'll be using keywords that you should have seen in your study and in your reading. Okay. We would have said last week that the papers are fourfold. I might ask you to list 2 purposes. For example, it's to control the audit work and to provide evidence, as somebody mentioned. A lot of the questions sometimes are almost even common sense. So if you feel you've forgotten a particular answer, just apply a common sense approach to the question. You might get lucky. Okay, that kind of stuff. All right, question number 1. Question 2.
Okay, question 2. So our notes, our little booklet only have 5 modules. If the midterm is modules 1 to 4, what's the final based on, just 5 or 1 to 5?
No. While you're getting ready for your examination next week, I'll be putting together the other parts that you will need for the second half of the semester. So you have up to unit 5, I think, module 5. And so I'll be providing you with 3 or 4 additional modules for the second half of the semester. And that will be sometime this week. But you don't need to be concerned about that until after the exam. But I'll send it to you so you can have it available if you're feeling really, really something and you want to read ahead.
Okay, thank you.
So Monique covered all the important stuff, the heavy hitting. All right, now that Monique has covered all the heavy hitting, is there anybody else who has any light hitting? Any other questions? Okay, I see Brian has joined us.
Yeah, good night, Omia.
Fine, Brian, how are you today?
I'm good, and yourself?
Oh, just fine. Trying to keep up with you young people. All right. Anybody in this class over 50? So even if I was, I wouldn't say they said. But I don't, I'll make a wild guess. I don't think so. Nobody sounds over 50. Let me put it that way. I won't even say whether or not I'm over 50. How's that?
Yeah.
Do I sound over 50?
Yeah.
Yes. What is your audit evidence, Brian?
My audit evidence is based on when you introduced yourself and you said you've been I guess lecturer or whatever have you for best for quite a number of years. I think you said 20 plus years or something like that.
Yeah, you make a good auditor after all. You remember stuff and you learn how to put 2 and 2 together. That's what auditing is about. You search, you investigate, and you put 2 and 2 together to come up with 4, not 3, not 5. Way to go.
Mhm. Actually, he said over 20 years at BIFS.
Sorry?
You said you lectured over 20 years at the Bahamas Institute for Financial Services.
I have, yes.
Mhm.
Much longer than that, but I'll just go with 20.
So go to 20, okay?
I'll just go with over 20 and call it that.
Okay.
I just can't believe where all the time has gone. All I can tell you, youngsters, when I say youngsters, I mean anybody 40 and under. Don't
Okay.
don't believe you have all the time in the world. That is a myth. Before you know it, you'll be that other number. That's all I'll say about that. All right. Okay, so I see 4 of us are here. I guess the others will be joining us shortly. Hopefully, that would be Indira and who's the other person that's not there? Indira and Javon. Okay. All right, well, let's get cracking. This is our last session before your examination next week. Monique has already gotten the down low with regards to the format of the examination. Monique, the short answer questions are also going to be somewhere between 10 and 15 questions. The examination will not run for the full class time. You should not need the full class time to do it, but you will have the full class time if you need it. Okay, because some of us are quite different from others. Some people like the hare who makes 90 miles an hour, the others are like the tortoise, but it doesn't matter whether you go fast or slow. What matters is that you get to the end. Okay, so you have the full class. If you are in New Providence, you have to go down to BIFS next Thursday and be there 15 minutes before your exam begins at 6:30. So you don't have to stress. Go in 15 minutes before, take a cup of coffee, whatever you drink, have a sip. Don't study anything, it'll be too late by then, and just relax so that you can be ready to do your thing next week. Everybody in this class is in New Providence, yes?
No, I don't think so. Somebody on the family island.
That's true. Indira, not Indira. Yeah, I think it's Indira.
No, I'm on island, Mr. Robinson, Letitia.
So Letitia, you will be doing your examination virtually, which means that you will get the link as usual next week, and 6:15 you will log on, okay? And be ready to take the instructions from Miguel or whoever the representative for the virtual side of the examination. Letitia, when you are done, you are required to save your work and then email it to Miguel and to myself so that we be sure that your examination gets to us. Okay, Letitia?
Good night, all.
Hi, Indira, how are you?
I'm great, and you?
Fine, just fine. We were talking about the examination next week. Indira, are you in New Providence or on the island?
I'm on the island.
Okay, so you and Letitia are on the island, which means that you will be doing, both of you will be doing the examination virtually. Next week, you come on at 6:15, you'll get the instructions. When you finish your examination, you save it and email it to Miguel and to myself, okay? So that your examination does not.
Yes, sir.
All right. So that's that. So who's missing from the room? Javon is the only person missing. Okay. Today we are in week number what? Anybody? What week are we in?
Is it week number 4?
Cinco. Five.
5?
Five.
Okay.
Yeah, week number 5. Okay, week number 5. Make a note of that, just so you know that you're in the correct week. All right. Did everybody get a copy of the case study?
Yes, I did.
I did.
I did.
Right.
Yes.
I was hoping there were no hiccups in the emails, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes Miguel sends me an email that is not quite correct, and so it ends up bouncing or going somewhere. All right. Any other questions you might have about the exam or such before we go into our final module for this evening? If you think of anything, please feel free to interrupt me at any time and raise any question that might come to mind. All right, so now today we are going to talk about audit techniques. What did we talk about in module 3? Anybody remember? Anybody remembers what we talked about in module? What was the topic of module 3?
Good evening.
Hi, John.
Oh, yeah, good catch.
And
Yes, sir.
you thought
Yeah.
you thought I wouldn't recognize your voice.
No, I mean, I said you.
Just, you know, sneaking in.
I mean,
That's
that
what
would
you-
make me a very bad thief if I was trying to sneak in just now. Then
Ah, okay. So let us. That means we have everybody now. Everybody. So we were talking about the exam, Javon. Next week, if you're in New Providence, you go down to this for 6:15. If you're not in New Providence, you come online for 6:15. Write your exam, save it, and send it to Miguel and myself. Monique asked about the format of the exam. It'll be short answers and definitions, 10 to 15 questions each that you to answer. Please keep your answers as crisp as possible. You don't have to write your answers word text. If you're that kind of student, feel free. But most students are just like, I just need to come up with the right thing. All right. You don't have to go on too long if the question does not require you to go on too long. Just enough as you need in order to correctly answer the questions. Okay.
we're covering the first 3 modules.
4
4
modules.
first 4. Okay.
Yeah, the 4th one we're doing today.
Okay.
Okay. Monique already also had another interesting question. She said, according to my file, I only have 5 modules. What are we going to do after the midterm? And I said, not to worry. I'll be sending you 3 or 4 more modules to go along with module number 5 that you have. And those are the ones that we'll be using for the remainder of the semester. Remember, the semester is not, the examinations are not going to be cumulative. Once you finish your midterm, you're finished with midterm. When you get to your final exam, it'll only be based on what you've done after the midterm, which begins with module 5. Okay? I don't want you going back trying to rehash all that stuff again, like the British used to do, and give you a big time examination of everything again. Pure, unadulterated torture. All right. Any other questions, Siobhan?
No, that was my only question.
Okay. So let's get into module 4 then. Module 4, by the way, did somebody tell me what the topic was for module 3? I don't think.
Audit planning.
Audit planning. Now, a common sense question. Why is it necessary for the auditor to plan?
It's important for the auditor to plan to ensure that he can complete the audit in a timely manner. And
What reason? Can anybody else add to that very important reason? Was it the
So
audit?
that the auditor can conduct, I guess, an effective and efficient audit.
Yeah, to conduct an effective and efficient audit. It would be very difficult to do that without a plan. So usually, by the time the auditor gets to your office, they have already sat down and said, we are going to review these accounts in the general ledger. We're going to review the minutes of the board of directors. We're going to review the report from the internal auditor. We're going to interview certain staff members in the accounting and other departments, including internal audit, to see how they respond to our questions. We're going to have a meeting with senior management and the board to find out exactly where their heads are and what they expect to see out of this audit. We are going to talk to them to solicit their cooperation as part of our plan. We are going to, Susie, you'll do the light stuff. John, you do the heavy stuff. Anybody has any questions, report to me. I'm the audit senior. I'll be supervising this audit. That's what an audit plan looks like. And oftentimes, all that stuff is actually documented. So everybody knows in writing, for the most part, how that audit is going to proceed for the most part. Are there changes along the way sometimes? Of course. But the principle is the audit plan is designed for effective and efficient audits. And of course, as she said, to ensure that the audit is conducted in a timely manner. The auditor doesn't want to stay there forever, even though forever means they make more money. So certainly the board and senior management, they do not want to see the auditor hanging around unnecessarily for too long either, because they don't want to pay all that money or any extra money if they don't have to. Okay? So that plan is very, very important, just like any other plan. And if you're planning to get married, you do certain things. You're planning a job interview, you do certain things. You're planning to go to church, you do certain things, and so on. Same principle. All right, audit planning. So now we talk about audit techniques. We take that plan, we go into the firm, and we have certain audit techniques that we consider to help us execute that plan. See, it's all connected. That's the other thing. Okay. So, anyone, what is the meaning of of test checking? Test checking is the first step, the first technique that auditors tend to use. Very important, as you will see if you've not read down the line yet. What is the meaning of test checking, anyone? I don't mind if you read it.
It's an in-depth examination.
Yes,
Um,
it's an in-depth exam.
yeah, from beginning to end,
Yeah,
from the beginning of the audit to, yeah.
okay. So, test checking. In-depth means what? Is that just like surface?
Like a thorough
Yeah,
exam.
yeah, a
Thorough,
thorough
efficient.
check,
Yeah,
not just a cursory look, a brief review. No, in-depth means in-depth. They go into detail, a detailed examination of what? A few selected transactions from the beginning to the end. In other words, test checking is not interested in checking every single transaction. That is inefficient and impractical. Even common sense. You don't even have to be an auditor to figure that out. So what do? They select a few transactions and check it from the beginning to the end. For example, sale of shoes. Okay, so what do? We check the sale of the shoes from the moment the customer goes to the cash register, pays for the shoes, given a receipt, the register registers the sale. You follow that sale to the bank, deposit, make sure it went into the bank, check the bank statement, bank reconciliation. Then you go into the general ledger to see if the sale was posted correctly. See? If that whole process is correct for a few selected transactions, the auditor could easily presume that maybe, perhaps, things are working the way they should with regards to the sale of goods and services in that firm. That's what test checking is all about. Okay? So, select a few, examine the process to the very end. Now, during the test checking process, we have something called the verification process. And of course, you must know from your own working experience, I hope, that when we verify something, what are we doing?
We're proving or checking to see that the facts or whatever is presented is correct.
Absolutely. And in this example that you have in your text and notes, we are checking at each stage of the verification process, whatever that might be, whether it's cash, accounts receivable, the sale of equipment, payment of liabilities, whatever it is the auditor is checking. At each stage, they look at what we call the relevant records, they examine them, and a determination is made as to whether these documents went through the proper process. The signatures on the documents, are they the signatures of the person who are authorized to sign them? Because remember, because the document has a signature on it doesn't mean that they're authorized to sign. How about that? And so the auditor is not just going to accept just because they see a signature. They're going to go to the records, the policy, to see if those are authorized signatures. Any of you work in an organization where they're authorized signatories?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, what does that mean? Somebody's an authorized signatory. How does that work?
Um,
If their signature
Yeah,
is not on it, it's not valid.
right.
Yeah, if
They're the ones that.
the approved signature is not on it,
Wow.
then it's not valid.
mm,
Okay? If the person is not approved by the board or by the company to sign, then their signature is not valid. Okay? Sometimes people fake the signature, sometimes people might just write in a signature hoping that it will not be noticed or whatever the case might be. But the key is, of course, these authorized signatures, not only they assist the auditor with the verification process, but they're also part of the company's control process. Kind of everybody signing, obviously. We have to have only what we call the authorized signatures. Now, notice we are told also that by reviewing all aspects of the accounting and operations, that the audit from the beginning to the end, this is what the test checking is all about. And the auditors always have such a process in its plan because that is so fundamental to the audit process. That is so fundamental to the decision that the auditor has to make at the end of the day as to whether or not he or she believes that the financial statements are true and. Can somebody finish that?
Fair.
Yeah, yes.
True and fair.
True and fair. Uh, once upon a time, we used to use the expression true and correct. I don't know, something caused them to change it from correct to fair. Fair sounds a little more ambiguous than correct. Correct sounds much more authoritative and to the point. But fair kind of leaves some room for the auditor to say, you really couldn't expect me to check everything and find all the errors and all the fraud. So we are fair on it. Correct is a little too correct. Too close to I am responsible if I don't find every single thing. That's really not what the auditor is thinking when he goes in. Too many transactions for the most part. Plus there's some frauds we already told that can be committed that are very difficult to detect, if not impossible. Those kinds of fraud have a primary name called, anybody remembers? Collusion. What is collusion?
When two or more persons are involved in fraud.
Yeah, thank you very much. And two or more people are involved in fraud of some kind. Okay, malfeasance of some kind, misappropriation of some kind. Okay, two or more people persuade each other to break the law, take a chance of going to prison for the love of. Anybody knows the next word for the love of?
Money.
Money.
Of course. Money, money, money. My. All right. So what about this in-depth examination of a few selected transactions? Well, auditors have another term that we use called representative sample. And representative sample means that it has to relate to the particular area in which it's under review, whether it's sales or expenses or assets or liabilities or capital, whatever it is, the samples must come from those areas. And another word that we use in auditing whenever we get a chance is called meticulous. Anybody knows what meticulous means?
Um,
Clear and precise.
Yeah, precise.
price.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the auditor selects a representative sample of the whole thing. And that, for example, if you have 5,000 loaves of bread to check, it's probably not practical to check 5,000 loaves of bread. So you said, okay, I'll select a representative sample of 10% or 20%. So what is 10% of 5,000, anyone?
500.
Hold 1 second for me. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So the auditor takes this representative sample. What is 10% of 5,000, anyone? For the bread.
500?
500?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So instead of sampling 5,000 loaves of bread, they will take 500 loaves of bread and say, we'll check these 500 to see if they are all fresh, with no molds and no poison and no COVID on it or whatever the case might be. If the more of the sample that turns out to be fresh without a problem, the greater the confidence that the auditor has that the transactions in that particular category are okay. However, if early in the check they start running into too many loaves of bread that are faulty, then the auditor might decide, wait a minute, out of the first 100 loaves of bread, 57 are faulty, we have a problem, Houston. And they might decide in a case like that, that rate is too high and they need to get a greater sample. And depending on the amount of money, the amount of situations involved in the particular firm, that sample could get bigger and bigger if the auditor does not have the confidence from the initial selection and review that all is well with that company. Okay? Again, these are what we call audit techniques. That's all they are. Okay, no, nothing magical. And these techniques are used to test the processes that goes on in the firm that the auditor goes to look at. Since they cannot audit audit everything, these samples are very important to their what we call their confidence level. Okay, the more processes are okay without an error or problem, the greater the confidence the auditor will have in that operation. If they run into too many errors and too many frauds along the way, that confidence level is going to go down. The auditor is going to be spooked and start checking more and more and more. Okay? The in-depth becomes in-depth squared, cubed, until the auditor is satisfied that either something has to be corrected and can be fixed, or maybe his initial review and thoughts of the situation were not quite what he thought they were, because as he got deeper and deeper, things settled down and began to look like they were working. The whole idea, part of the plan, is to do this so that the auditor can get a handle, a feel for what's actually happening overall in the organization. All right. If you look at number 6, for example, and the example, it's page 1 on my sheet. Does everybody see that? It says number 6, example.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in this example, and again, we're talking about audit techniques. Technique is a way of doing something. Okay, if you're playing basketball, you have a technique. If you're playing football, you have a technique. What else do we need a technique for? Anybody? Technique? Anyone? What do we need a technique for? Just basketball and football? What do we need a technique for? What else? What about brushing your teeth? Do we have a technique for brushing our teeth?
Yes, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. There are all sorts of stuff. We just don't really think about it that way.
Yeah, technique for
If
baking.
you're a garment, if you're baking, checking a car engine, all of these things, different techniques are involved.
Require techniques depending on what you're seeking to do. Okay. So same thing. The audit techniques are designed to take the auditor through the audit process with the hope that they will not find too many errors and too many frauds along the way, so that at the end of the day they can say truly this company is presented in a true and fair way. That's really the objective. So in this example in number 6, an in-depth audit of transactions related to the purchase of goods involved the verification of the following. And this is just an example of what an in-depth verification on the purchasing side would look like. For example, A, that the purchase requisition is pre-printed, pre-numbered, and authorized. Why would that be important to the auditor? Anyone?
That shows it's an authentic request for purchase.
Yes, because if it's pre-numbered, you can't do what? Change any numbers.
Right.
And if you try to change it, it will be as obvious as hell, including ripping the page out, because the whole number will be missing.
Mhm.
All right. So pre-numbered requisitions or pre-numbered anything is a major control method. And auditors love to see pre-numbered documents when they go to a firm, because now they know that the firm is taking steps to control what's going on in the firm. Without those pre-numbers, people will write in numbers, make up numbers, or don't put any numbers at all. And then if something goes wrong, it'll be very difficult to track it, and even more difficult to say who might be responsible. Okay?
What
Pre-num-
page is that? Sorry.
Oh, we're still on page 1 at the bottom.
It's page 47 in our booklet.
Yeah, page 47 in your booklet. I'm just saying page 1 because I'm looking at just this particular sheet. Do you see it? Page 47, number 6, and it says example. Do you see it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Another thing the auditor might look for as an example in its selection for the purchasing side of things is a quotation. Anybody knows what a quotation is? What is a quotation?
An estimate for cost of a service or goods?
Absolutely. Not only does he look for the quotation to see if one exists, but he analyzes it. So he looks at the quotation to make sure it has all the tenets of a quotation. Because some quotations don't have all the details it's supposed to have. Some quotations are fake. Just put there to make it look like it's legitimate. And depending on the amount of money involved, the auditor may take that quotation and check it with the person who's involved, the third party or other who is involved with the transaction, just to verify it. Because sometimes people are always up to some wild and crazy stuff. Suppose the auditor were to come to one of you guys and say, I'd like to see the quotation for this particular purchase. And then you say, well, we can't find it. What do you think? How do you think the auditor might feel about that? We can't find it. Is that a problem for the auditor?
Yes, that's something that's going on. Why can't you find it? You're supposed to be able to present it, eh? Be
Absolutely.
able to present.
Absolutely. Why can't you find it? And you say, well, we lost it. So what? Because you're getting uptight with the auditor now. That doesn't help either. Well, can't you audit something else? That further concerns the auditor, because now we have staff members with a major attitude. And the question is, why? Could this person with the
Right.
attitude be that is responsible for the missing quote? And so
So that
on. Sorry?
it raises suspicion.
Absolutely. And this is found to be true in many instances. Okay? So again, all these little subtle things are going on during an audit. You think that they're just in there checking a bunch of stuff to get the hell out. And that is true. They are there checking a bunch of stuff to get the hell out as quickly as possible. But between all that stuff, they check in other stuff too, like employees, employee attitudes, how employees respond to certain questions. Where are the files? How is the filing kept? Is the filing in order? See, a whole lot of stuff can make the auditor either happy or concerned based on what he sees or hears. Okay. The official purchase order should be there pre-numbered. If it's not, there's a concern. If the goods came in, who received it? Do you have a document showing that they were received? How much? Did they sign it? The person bringing the goods, the person receiving the goods, are their signatures on it? Are they authorized? See? Audit is checking all this stuff. Is there a delivery receipt? Did the goods reach the storehouse? If it did, where's the proof that it did? Who verified that it got to the storehouse? Or did it just go from the truck to the ground and then somebody ran off and took it home? Lots of things going on. When goods are being disbursed from stores, is somebody recorded? Who records it? Are they authorized to record it? Where's the recording book kept? Is the recording book manual or electronic? See? Who oversees that function? Welcome to the auditor's job. And this is just purchasing. This isn't anything else yet. And so the auditors will be asking these kinds of questions for a select sample in purchasing, for example. And depending on how well the answers go, he might decide, okay, I'm happy that the purchasing process is the way it should be. All the pre-numbered stuff is in place, all the requisitions are in place, everything is accounted for signature-wise, it's gone from the truck to the warehouse and storage, somebody's reporting when goods are taken out of the storage, and so on. To the contrary, if too many of these questions are not going the way they should, that will raise a concern to the auditor, and then suddenly they're digging deeper, staying longer, charging you more money. Purchase invoices, who approved them? Are they authorized to approve? Were the transactions entered in the general ledger or the day book, we call it in the UK? Were they posted to the purchaser's ledger? All the stuff the auditor is looking for, and this is only purchases. Was the check paid, if yet, to the correct vendor? Or was it paid to somebody's private account somewhere? And who is the vendor? Is the vendor authorized to be a vendor? Or is the vendor just a business owned by one of the employees in purchasing? Anybody get what I just said? Like what I'm saying? Everybody's understanding what I'm saying? How things can go astray if you're not
Yes.
checking?
Yes.
And we're talking about purchasing here, but that can be anything that's going on in your organization. Okay. For example, let's see. Who works in a financial institution?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Uh, can you give us, any one of you, an example?
I used to.
Used to. Okay. Can you give us, any one of you, an example of what could go wrong in a financial institution that an auditor might be looking to detect? Give us an example.
Maybe proper invoices for transactions and
Yeah,
payments.
proper invoices for transactions. Very crucial that invoices are properly checked and verified before they are paid. Very crucial to make sure that they're being paid to the correct vendor and not some other fraudulent account. And these things are very real for many of you who work in financial institutions or anywhere else for that matter. Okay. So you are definitely in the right place at the right time, because this information applies to your jobs and your life as we speak in one form or another. Okay. So test checking, to summarize, means to select and examine a representative sample from a large number of what we call similar items. And they have to be similar because if they're different, then we have to check more. If they're all the same, then we can come up with what we call a representative sample or a good sample, a reasonable sample. If they work out, we're happy with that particular process. If they don't pan out, then we have to bring some things to the board's attention to suggest that some changes need to be made because some major things are going wrong. We are told that test checking is an accepted auditing procedure. Why? Because once upon a time when they first started test checking, there was a big hue and cry that the auditors only checking a select amount of transactions. Why is it that they're not checking every single thing? After all, they did come to see if we're doing everything right. And the auditor's response is, look, we go into even a small, I wouldn't talk about a medium to large company. We cannot humanly check every single thing. And even if we could come up with the manpower, I don't know which company in the world has the money to afford to pay for that manpower. Okay? All right. So that's your definition of test checking, a whole page of it with examples. Okay? So if I raise a question on test checking, I suspect that nobody should be in the dark. Okay? So those are the meanings and examples of test checking. Now, let's look at what we call the features of test checking. We already know it deals with a selected representative that is selected by the auditor. The features, however, are those techniques that are applied, say techniques again. The features of the test checking are those techniques that are applied to the test checking process. Okay? And there are a couple. Number one, we have the scientific method that we use as auditors. Check. Scientific method is a very sophisticated mathematical method that is applied to selected samples. Only those audit firms who probably are auditing huge companies or large companies are going to consider this selective process because it may have to be computer generated using certain matrix in order to come up with a conclusion based on the evidence. But the important thing for you guys to know that there is a scientific method that is used to check and to test these transactions. The estimation process. Well, estimation is estimation. When we estimate, do we have a complete and accurate position? Anyone? When we estimate, do we have a complete error-free situation?
No, it's just a guide, a sample. It isn't precise,
Yeah. And
but it is representative of what you're checking.
yes, an estimate is not precise to the point. It is representative. It is subject to error, subject to amendment. It's just like when you go to get an estimate on your car. Okay, this bumper is busted. Can you give me an estimate? Estimate sometimes mean that that's all they'll charge you, or sometimes an estimate might mean this is my best estimate until I actually take the bumper down and find out there's some other problems. So now the original estimate has to change. Okay, so an estimation. So scientific, mathematical approach, then we have an estimated approach. Then, of course, number 3 talks about material items. Okay. Those entries that involve large amounts of issues related to the accounting records are looked at, where the numbers are big, where the numbers are significant. The auditor will look at the bigger numbers first. They are not keen to spend a lot of time on what they call small immaterial amounts. $100, $1,000, $5,000 even sometimes. If they're in a multi-million or billion-dollar company, they are looking at the material aspect of it, not necessarily nitpicking, for sure. But they tend to avoid small immaterial amounts at all costs. It's time consuming, there's no benefit. Unless, of course, they stumble upon a small amount of money that may have been defrauded, and so they suggest to themselves, well, even though this is small, the act is fraud, which means that if we start off with small fraud, chances are there's big fraud somewhere in the company. All right. What about number 4? Can somebody pick that up? Number 4, start reading full coverage over a time period. So, by the way, let me just find who read the last time. Anyone? Who read the last time? Or better still, who was our last reader? Was that you, Javon?
I read the class before that for module 2.
You read the last time.
I can't recall. I didn't read last week though.
Okay.
I read the last.
Yeah, I think that was who read the last time?
I did.
Yeah, Indira.
Indira.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I had Indira read until forever and ever. Amen. She must have thought like, man, am I the only one here? Okay, yeah, Indira, thank you very much. Since Siobhan was moonlighting last week while you were reading, we will pull Siobhan into the reading cortex and see what's kicking. Okay, Siobhan, number 4, full coverage over a time period.
Full coverage over a time period. Test checking is normally planned in such a way that the audit program for 3 to 5 years to cover all types of transactions in the case of medium or large companies. Thus, if in 1 year the months of January, June, and December are checked, April, July, and September may be checked in the second year and so on. Surprise element. The staff and management of the auditing company should not be able to anticipate the pattern of test checking. Otherwise, they will predict the areas and periods to be covered in any 1 year and will be careful regarding the same. Flexibility. If test checking becomes routine, predictable, and mechanical, it loses its value. Hence, the auditor should keep changing the methods of test checking at reasonably frequent intervals. Judgment base. The extent of test checking would primarily depend on the auditor's judgment of a particular situation. The judgment in turn depends on the previous experience of the auditor, current developments, and the efficiency of the internal control system.
Okay, stick a pin 1 second, Javon. So you see, under this process of test checking, the features cover quite a number of things. A scientific method, estimation as opposed to complete cover, whether the transactions that are being looked at are material or not, covering different time frames, the surprise element, let's not forget that. Anybody ever in here ever been a part of a surprise audit? No? Yeah, the good old days.
Yes, I have.
You have. How did that go? How did that surprise audit go generally?
Oh, it went okay. Where I used to work, they usually have auditors who just come in and do surprise audits.
Yeah, they don't.
So it was
And what do you think the benefits of a surprise audit might be, anyone?
It doesn't give the person your
honest.
audit time to,
Yeah,
hide anything that should need to be hidden,
yeah, the hide
or
anything.
preparation.
Yeah, preparation, hide stuff, pull stuff, put money back, borrow money to put money back, steal money from some back, whatever it is. It doesn't give you time to do anything. You just stuck and you start praying after that they do not find out what's going on, depending on what some people are up to. Okay. And then of course we have the flexibility of the audit, which is very important. Changing the methods if you're not flexible, only the employees will pick up on what your methods are, and then they'll start adapting. Because remember, people are more brilliant than we give them credit for. Right? And any experienced auditor must know this and remain flexible. And let's not forget the judgment of the auditor. Judgment is based on experience and training. If the auditor is very experienced and well trained, they will make better judgment calls. Of course, the opposite is true. Okay, if those things are not there, then the auditor will be somewhat ineffective in doing the job properly.
Mr. Wilkerson, can you expand a bit more on that judgment-based technique?
Yeah, I think you should say that. Let me ask you a question, because not too many students ask about the judgment base. 1 or 2 every now and then, but folks just kind of like, whatever. Judgment day is judgment day kind of thing. What made you ask?
I guess it's, to me, it would be sort of like subjective to the auditor's, I guess, experience and what he thinks. I just wanted to know what goes into that,
Yeah,
and what's, and where, like, in which situations or companies or so where that type of audit is, maybe that technique is relied on more.
yeah, that albeit is a very good question. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no ideal company. There's no best suited situation for the exercising of judgment. Judgment, for example, if you are driving on a dark road at night for a long period of time and you come to a fork in the road, the question then becomes, should you go left or should you go right? Of course, you don't have any kind of predetermined information. Somebody might say, well, just pick one. But some people might pick one just, okay, fine, whatever the hell, I'll just pick one. And others might say, wait a minute, the last dark road I went on uh, like this and came to a fork in the road, when I went left, I always tend to have this kind of experience. I think my better judgment tells me I should go right. Does that mean the person is right? No. All they're doing is looking at the situation and then they go back into their past, their experience, what they have gone through previously to see if they had some been in contact with something similar. And then based on that experience and any other information that they might have about the situation, they will then draw a conclusion. For example, if you ask a staff member for a file and they say, I can't find it. And then you say, but it's imperative that you find it because the auditor needs it in order to complete its work. And then you say, well, you start developing an attitude. Then the auditor doesn't know for sure that something is wrong, but based on your behavior, based on the fact that the auditor has seen similar behaviors before, and it was determined that the person was actually the perpetrator or a co-conspirator or such thing, then the auditor might make a judgment call that there's something suspicious about the person's behavior. Okay? That's that's the only way we can explain judgment. Judgment is not tangible, like recording a debit and a credit in the general ledger. Judgment is an intangible, untouchable phenomena that people just exercise based on their experience and their background and their education and their training and their culture and whatever else impacts their lives. Okay? Absolutely. So, to try to bring a close to that explanation to your question, typically young auditors tend to exercise poor judgment. Does anybody know why? Not 100% of the time, but typically. Why?
Inexperience.
Inexperience. Absolutely. Not enough experience, not enough training, and in some cases, not enough education yet. Okay. And of course, the older you get, the better your judgment tends to be. For example, if you're a little 18-year-old teeny bopper, the first guy who says you're cute and that mini is just like doggone crushing. Then you're like, oh, Javon loves me. Not necessarily, but you're a teeny bopper, you don't really get it. Okay? So you make a poor judgment and agree to marry Stinky Javon. And you don't find out until afterwards. Of course, after you divorce Javon, and you get a little bit older, you're supposed to be, like the experienced auditor, better able to make judgment calls when it comes to who you will date and marry. Same principle. Of course, some of you might know some people, they look like they don't seem to get it, and they don't seem that they'll ever find out how to practice good judgment. That is an unfortunate truth, but hopefully that's in the minority. Okay? Like the experienced versus the inexperienced auditor. the ones who have been around and had experience and had involvement with many, many audits will make better judgment calls and decisions overall, whatever capacity, than the more inexperienced, ill-trained auditor. Okay? Hopefully that helps to answer your question. For example, those of you who have children, there's a mom, why you did that? I just made a judgment call. I said, Mommy, what do you mean by judgment call? Then you can't really put your finger to it because it's intangible. It's that thing, that decision you made based on your own experience as a parent. And so you made a judgment call based on that. It's the same principle. So the child goes off not knowing because they're young, they don't know what the hell is going on. But they'll find out later on that they too will make judgment calls as they get older. All right, good question. Okay, Siobhan, keep going. Factors to be considered.
All right, factors to be considered. The factors to be considered for deciding upon the extent of checking on a sampling plan are size of the organization under audit, state and efficiency of the internal control.
Now, that's a tricky word.
Yeah,
Yeah. Now, I would like somebody who has access to Google to look up that word for us. It's called efficacy.
efficacy. Yeah.
What does that mean?
The ability to produce a desired or intended result.
Yeah, the desired or intended result. So the auditor is looking to see whether the situation will produce the intended results with regards, yeah, to the company's internal control system. Okay, is it working? Do you have authorized signatures? Do you have 2 and 3 people signing? Do you have all the things, and do you have somebody checking the goods storage to make sure the goods get into the storehouse and not leave before it reaches there? There's somebody in there dispersing these things as people need them, or people just walk in and grab what they need. Okay, these are all internal control issues that auditors will check. Efficacy to see if they're really working according to schedule or policy. Okay, keep going.
Adequacy and reliability of books and records. Error range, degree of confidence.
Okay.
When should test checks be used? Test checks can be adopted in the following cases. Volume of transactions. In cases where the number of transactions is quite large. Time factor where the auditor has a very little time at its disposal. Check. What? The bucket is kind of messed up. Disposal check all to, yeah, the bucket is kind of scrambled up, but
at his disposal to check.
yeah, all the transactions of a medium or large company.
Mhm.
Identical transactions. When there are several transactions of identical and
Another tricky.
homogeneous nature.
Yeah, what does homogeneous mean? Anyone?
The same kind or like,
Yeah, same kind. So if the transactions are similar, the same, then test checking can work quite well. Okay, if there are a bunch of different, that's get tricky because you're dealing with apples and oranges as opposed to just apples and apples. All right, keep going.
internal control. When there exists a satisfactory internal control system, manual and or computerized. Advantages and disadvantages of test checking. Advantages of test checking. Audit objective. The auditor is required to form an opinion on the financial statements even after 100% checking. He may not find absolute satisfaction. Therefore, proper and careful test checking serves the audit objective in obtaining reasonable audit assurance.
And remember, we said earlier, it's almost impossible to check everything. That's why we have test checking. What is test checking? Taking a selective or representative sample from the whole thing, start to finish, to see if everything is in place. The more things that are being done correctly during the check, the auditor will be satisfied to the greatest possible extent. The more problems they encounter going through the review of the sample, the more concerned the auditor will be, and they have to end up increasing the sample size, etc., or looking at certain things more closely. Okay. All right, keep going.
Expertise. The application of test check principles involves the application of mind and intelligent judgment. It enables the auditor to use his expertise effectively.
Mhm.
Exception principle. Test checking adopts the principle of exception in control. If certain aspects of internal control do not create suspicion, there is no need to verify all those transactions exhaustively.
Go.
Scientific assessment of risk. The auditor assesses the risk of material misstatements in the financial statements in a scientific manner by drawing suitable samples and studying the same in detail. Saves time. As fewer transactions are verified, time is saved to a great extent. This enables the completion of the audit / verification procedures in timely manner.
Let me say this before Javon goes on. In the old days, and even in recent times, depending on which country or jurisdiction you're in, this save time thing has come back to haunt auditors because saving time by doing sampling audits as part of the audit plan is a practical way to go. The only problem is if everything goes well, nobody's going to bother you about that technique. However, something goes wrong, the company collapses. Who do you think will be the first person they'll blame?
The auditor.
The auditor, because the auditors are supposed to be able, quote unquote, to detect all these problems. And we already know that the auditors have already said, we are great at what we do, but we're not God. Cannot be expected to check every single transaction and to get every single thing right. Okay, or verify. Let me put it that way. Verify. Okay. All right, keep going.
Reduction in workload. The volume of work is reduced by test checking methods. Audit processes are not carried or mechanically or on transactions.
Yeah, I think that should be all.
Yeah.
All transactions. Keep going.
Disadvantages of test checking. The disadvantages of test checking are naive and biased. The extent to which test checking can be resorted to is a matter of the auditor's personal assessment. It does not ensure the selection of representative samples or adequate size and offers opportunities for bias to enter selection process. Non-authentic. Test checking lacks authenticity.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's the answer you want.
Precision and acceptable biases. It does not give the auditor an idea about the degree or reliability that can be placed on the findings. Higher risk. Runs the risk that some of the material error may not be discovered and some of the important areas may go unaudited. It may even increase the level of inherent audit risk. Unscientific. It involves a lot of
Arbitrariness.
on the part of the auditor in determining the selecting of number of transactions. Therefore, the approach cannot be considered as a scientific one. Difference in activity levels. Where activity levels vary in a year, example, a few months of peak production and sales seasons, the auditor cannot draw reasonable conclusions about the transactions of the whole year merely by checking transactions of a few specified months. Lack of surprise element. If the surprise element is absent, the client may predict the checking pattern.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, for that. So you can see that test checking in principle has a great advantage to getting things done quickly, without stress to some extent. But the only problem is, despite the advantages that are given for test checking, there are some significant disadvantages that are highlighted. And so stuff like that you want to be aware of. Because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I see a test question glaring me in the eye when I see advantages and disadvantages. Because it's easy for me to say, list 2 or 3 advantages and disadvantages of test checking. And that's 4 to 6 easy points if only you had looked at it at all to see what they are. Remember, you do not have to remember everything word for word. For most of us, that is humanly impossible. But you are required to remember from the review and study the key aspects of these things. Okay? And bear in mind, students, as you know, you've done other examinations before, no doubt. When you are studying, you always feel like you're not getting anywhere, you're not remembering. But trust me, if you're studying, you're remembering. The brain is an amazing thing. If you study and prepare well enough, even though you might be getting that feeling like, I don't feel, when you get into the examination, something amazing happens if you study. Now, if you didn't study, or your study was half-hearted and insufficient, nothing amazing will happen. The usual will happen. You will frustrate yourself to death and go nowhere quickly. Okay? One or the other. All right, but then you guys already know that. That's just me pushing you on. All right. Now, the question has come up about test checking versus routine checking. Are they the same? Are they different? Do they operate under similar circumstances or not? Are they somewhat the same? Are they completely indifferent to each other? Can we compare them any way to suggest that they might be similar? And the truth of the matter is, somebody make a guess. Are they the same? Test checking and routine checking. Are they the same? Or I could say in the test checking and routine checking are the same. True or false? What do you think you should say?
I don't think they're the same.
I,
Go ahead.
they have some similarities, but it's not the same thing because the test checking is random and the routine is I think where you it's more habitual, something that you do on a daily basis or almost automatically.
Yeah, certainly
Um,
not a practical. Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting and correct observation of the differences between the two. Thus, the answer would be false. They are not the same. Okay. All right. So if they're not the same, let's take a moment to find out if they have any similarities and certainly what their differences might be. Okay. Shaniqua read, Indira read last week. Shaniqua, did you read last week?
No, I didn't.
Wonderful, Shaniqua. So what I want you to do for us in this table is to first of all read off what comes under particular or particulars, then read the test checking method, and then read the routine checking method for each one of the particulars. Okay, beginning with the meaning.
Okay. So it's test checking versus routine checking. We have the particulars in one column, test checking in the second column, and routine checking in the third column. Meaning, test checking is an accepted auditing procedure wherein only a part of its transactions is checked to form an opinion instead of checking all the transactions. External auditor. Routine checking is the detailed checking of all transactional aspects, such as CAS, sub-CAS, carry forwards, extensions, and calculations, etc. And subsidiary books, checking of posting into the ledgers, casting of ledger accounts, and extraction of their balances. internal auditor.
So you see right away, let's take a pinch, Shaniqua, right away, in terms of the meaning, one is detailed, the other is not. One is carried out by the external auditor, the other by the internal auditor. Very important differences, and we just got out of the gate. Okay. All right, Shaniqua, keep going.
Okay, objectives. To obtain a reasonable level of satisfaction about all transactions, but verifying a few representative transactions called samples. Under routine checking, to verify the arithmetical accuracy of the entries. That was A. B, to verify the accuracy of posting to ledgers. C, to check that the ledger accounts have been correctly balanced. And D, to ensure that no figures are altered after checking.
Yeah, so again, one is less precise, the other is far more detailed and precise, even in terms of the objectives of the two. With regards to the meaning, it applies. With regards to the objective, it applies. Let's see what else happens. Keep going.
Advantages. For test checking, A, it saves time. B, proper and careful test checking is helpful and serves the audit objective. C, volume of work is reduced. D, time available for other audits. For routine checking, A, checking of posting and ledgers. B, arithmetical accuracy can be checked. C, trial balance tallying is facilitated. D, easy detection of errors and frauds. E, delegation of audit work to junior staff.
Different again, very different. Keep going.
Okay, disadvantages. Test checking. A, client staff may become careless. B, some errors and frauds may go undetected. C, all items and transactions are not checked. D, an element of doubt and risk is present in the auditor's opinion. For routine checking, A, highly mechanical process. B, monotonous activity
Yeah, monotonous, very good.
may lead to boredom. C, major items of frauds and high-level intricacies and complexities may not be revealed. D, compensating errors and errors of principle will not come to light.
Good. So as you can see, in meaning and objectives and advantages and disadvantages, these guys are by far maybe seventh cousins. They are not the same. In fact, they may be complete strangers for the most part, totally unrelated. Okay? One appears to be the opposite of the other one. Okay? Every time we think about details, which side do we think about?
Routine.
Yeah, we think about detail, we think about routine. When we think about test checking, we think about non-routine. Let's get it quick. Let's do a couple of items and let's get out of here. Okay. There are people in the world that fit both of these boxes. Some people are like test checking people, and then you have some people are like routine people. They do the same thing every single day in detail. All right, test checking people, no way. They get restless after a moment's notice. No reason at all. Okay? Fascinating. And so it's important for the auditors to understand their roles. Typically, test checking is done by external auditors. Typically, routine checking is done by anyone?
Internal.
Internal auditors. Much more detail. All right, keep going, Shaniqua.
Okay. Audit sampling, meaning, number one, the purpose of this auditing and assurance standard, AAS, is to establish standards on the design and selection of an audit sample and the evaluation of the sample results. This AAS applies equally to both statistical and non-statistical sampling methods. Either method, when properly applied, can provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence.
Question before she goes on. If I were to ask you in my definition, suppose I was to put definition in the test next week. Number one, AAS, what would be your answer?
It's the auditing and assurance standard to establish standards on the design.
Well, you could say that extra, but if I just put AAS,
It's the auditing and assurance standard.
yeah, and you put auditing and assurance standard, you're absolutely right. Now, if you add the extra, you'll still get credit, but you don't need it. Okay? Now, if I say, what is the purpose of AAS? Then if you just put auditing and assurance standard full stop, you're gonna have a problem, Houston. Then you can go into that little piece you were talking about afterwards, which is to establish the standards, etc. Okay, keep that in mind. Another question before Shaniqua goes on. Can somebody hazard a guess as to what we mean at this stage in the semester, which is midway almost, by sufficient, appropriate audit evidence? Now, I don't expect you to come up with a super right answer. In fact, there might still not be a completely correct answer. But typically, what do you think that means at this stage of your auditing life, 6 weeks later? Sufficient, appropriate audit evidence. What do you think that means? Make a guess.
I can, oh, sorry, gone.
No, go ahead, you go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to say after an auditor has done their testing and sampling, they can, I guess, with confidence say that these financial statements are fairly stated.
Yeah, no, that's a good try. And what would cause them to say that they have discovered at the end of the audit sufficient appropriate audit evidence? You said they did their sampling, okay? So what do you think would ultimately get them to think that, okay, we have sufficient audit evidence to make our opinion? What might cause them to come up to say that?
I think it would be the results of the testing. If they find that, there, few errors, the accuracy or the correctness of the information provided.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't put it better myself. Okay, in the two responses, we have a situation where they've taken the sample, they found minimum errors and problems and frauds. And so if they go through the entire audit with that kind of track record, then they could say to their greatest satisfaction in terms of the context in which the audit was conducted, that they have found sufficient, appropriate audit evidence. Appropriate meaning they found all the information they hoped to find within the testing process. No off-the-wall mumbo jumbo. Okay? And as a result of that, they can now form an opinion. And that opinion is these financial statements are deemed to be true and fair. Yes. All right, keep going, Shaniqua.
Okay. Number two, when using either statistical or non-statistical sampling methods, the auditor should design and select an audit sample, perform audit procedures thereon, and evaluate sample results so as to provide sufficient, appropriate audit evidence. Number three, audit sampling means the application of audit procedures to less than 100% of the items within an account balance to establish the characteristics of the item selected in order to form or assist in forming a conclusion concerning the entire population.
Okay.
4, It is important to recognize that certain test procedures do not come within the definition of sampling. Tests performed on 100% of the items within a population do not involve sampling.
Take a pen. So every test is not considered to be test checking. Because, for example, if you run a jewelry store and you have $10 million worth of jewelry, but you only have 5 pieces, that means that each piece is an average of how much? Each piece is an average cost of
20%?
or in dollars. Yeah, what is 20% of
What was the total?
10 million?
Oh, 10 million. Like 2 million?
2 million, absolutely. So if an auditor comes to audit that jewelry store, are they gonna take a sample of the 5? Like, just look at one. Would they do that?
Yeah.
No, they're gonna look just 5 items. They do test
all.
everything.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
just 5.
limited. It's small.
See, watch this. Who was it who asked me about judgment earlier? Monique?
I did, Letitia.
Tisha. Now here's what happens. If there are only 5 items are worth an average of $2 million, an auditor that is exercising good judgment, in that case, will audit all 5 pieces.
Right.
An auditor that is exercising poor judgment might say, I'm still going to go with the percentage sampling. I don't care what they think. That's how I studied in school. I'm a young punk. I'll do whatever I want. And so they said, I'll just review one.
Hmm.
All right. In that case, the auditor who's reviewing all pieces is considered to be exercising good judgment. And of course, the auditor that decides to audit only one piece, for whatever reason, is would normally be said to be exercising poor judgment. Wow. All right, keep going.
Okay. Likewise, applying audit procedures to all items within a population which have a particular characteristic. For example, all items over a certain amount does not qualify as audit sampling with respect to the population examined, nor with regard to the population as a whole, since the items were not selected from the total population on a basis that was expected to be representative. Such items might imply some characteristic of the remaining portion of the population, but would not necessarily be the basis for a valid conclusion about the remaining portion of the population. Okay. Factors in determining sample size, sampling risk. Number 1, when determining the sample size, the auditor should consider sampling risk, the tolerable error, and the expected error. Sampling risk. Number 2, sampling risk arises from the possibility that the auditor's conclusion based on a sample may be different from the conclusion that would be reached if the entire population were subjected to the same audit procedure. Number 3, the auditor is faced with sampling risk in both tests of control and substantive procedure as follows.
Now, before she goes on, let's take a moment to look at the 2 types of error that the auditor is expected or might be expecting to encounter. One is called tolerable error, and the other one is called expected error. Interesting terminology. Which one do you think is better? They're both errors. Now we're talking about the lesser of 2 evils. Which one you think is better, tolerable error or expected error?
Expected.
Expected error. Okay, why do you say that?
I guess they anticipate certain errors during testing or sampling.
Yeah, it's more of an anticipation as opposed to tolerable error, which might be less of an anticipation, just something that comes up and you have to decide, can I tolerate this? Okay. Question. Anybody in the class is married?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Then you guys will be my scapegoat for this one. For married people only. If you're not married, this doesn't apply to you yet. For married people only. Are in-laws tolerable or expected error?
Expected error.
Okay. Okay. Beats the hell of me. Why did you choose that one?
Well, I'll choose that because it coming from two different backgrounds.
Yes.
And then, some people don't, some people they then used to a certain way. Not
Right.
everybody adjusts or not everybody is willing to accept.
Right.
Some people say that they'll accept others, but not when you're not like them. They tend to have an error. It becomes an error.
Yeah, it becomes a quote unquote error. Like there's always a problem that creates something. Okay, that's a pretty good way of looking at it, actually. All right, absolutely. And so because of those differences in backgrounds and circumstances, then you have an expected level of quote unquote error where things can go wrong as a result. Okay. What about the person who chooses tolerable error? Tolerable means that there's a point that you're prepared to accept, and then after that, you're not going to accept that level of error anymore. You're going to record it, you're going to make us think about it, you're going to report it to the court, and so on. Okay? So if it's tolerable, like 5,000 instead of 5 million, fine, I might consider that a tolerable error. But if it's 2 million or 5 million, well, we have a problem, Houston. I'm not going to tolerate that error. Okay? Which of the two errors do you think leads to greater disagreement? Tolerable or expected? Which of the two errors lead to greater disagreement?
Which of the two errors leads to what?
Greater disagreement potentially. If you have a certain level of,
Tolerable.
yeah, tolerable, very good. It's you said that. Why did you choose that one? You're right. But why did you choose that one?
I'll say tolerable too.
Yeah, why do you choose that one? You're right. But why do you
Your
choose?
level of, I guess, judgment or tolerable might be higher or lower than mine.
Yeah, depending on how that goes, once the person has reached a level of tolerance, anything after that is going to
Yeah.
be agreement. On the other hand, expected error, you already expect it to be issues, and therefore you may end up with a what? Higher tolerance level than the person who's operating on tolerance level alone. All right, by all means. All right, so you can see this auditing thing is not just coming in, looking at a few pieces of paper and leaving. It involves a whole lot of accounting and auditing and psychological and social and all kinds of other skills that we saw earlier in the semester. Now you can see why. It's no child's play, actually, if you're doing it right. Okay, Shaniqua,
Mhm.
you went off into the deep end. Keep
Okay, test self-control. One, risk of under-reliance. The risk that although the sample result does not support the auditor's assessment of control risk, the actual compliance rate would support such an assessment. Two, risk of over-reliance. The risk that although the sample result supports the auditor's assessment of control risk, the actual compliance rate would not support such as an assessment. Substantive procedures, B, that was B. One, risk of incorrect rejection. The risk that although the sample results supports the conclusion that a recorded account balance or class of transactions is materially misstated. In fact, it is not materially misstated.
In other words, you could have a situation where, based on the sample, you would think that everything is fine. And then when you start checking closer, you discover like, wait, one cotton picking minute. This sample and the reality within this account are not the same. The sampling was off because what I'm finding out in the account is much different from what I anticipated the sample results would have been. Okay? Keep going.
Two, risk of incorrect acceptance. The risk that although the sample result supports the conclusion that a recorded account balance or class or transactions is not materially misstated. In fact, materially is misstated. Four, the risk of under-reliance and the risk of incorrect rejection affect audit efficiency as they would ordinarily lead to additional work being performed by the auditor or the entity, which would establish that the initial conclusions were incorrect. The risk of over-reliance and the risk of incorrect acceptance affect audit effectiveness and are more likely to lead to an erroneous opinion and the financial statements that either the risk of under-reliance or the risk of incorrect rejection. Five, sample size is affected by the level of sampling risk the auditor is willing to accept from the results of the sample. The lower the risk the auditor is willing to accept, the greater the sample size will need to be.
Thank you very much, Shaniqua. Great job, great job. And so in 4, we have a whole bunch of gobbledygook in audit language, just basically saying, hey, we might put too much reliance on a particular piece of information based on our sampling work, or too little reliance, too little, too much, either way. If it doesn't work out to be what it is in actual practice, then we have a problem, Houston. We have to go back and clean up the mess. Okay? Change the sampling size, change the procedure that we're using, whatever the case might be. And then, of course, in rounding it off, we are told that if the auditor, that the lower the risk the auditor is willing to accept, the greater the sample size he will need to have. Now, in simple language, that means if you want minimum risk, you have to increase your sample size. Review more transactions, 10 times more, 50% more, 100% more, whatever the auditor decides it needs to be, in order to lower the risk that he might be missing something. So you can see this judgment call is very serious business, because this sampling risk-related situation is not scientific. And there is no guarantee to the auditor that once the audit is done, that somebody will still not discover errors and frauds. Chances are there will going to be errors and frauds sitting in there. The auditor is simply trying to do what? Detect as many of them as possible and minimize the risk of their impact on the overall performance of the company. Very tricky work. Okay. A lot of the audit work is what we call objective, meaning you can touch it, feel it, make it happen, browse it, record it. Then again, a lot of it is intangible. You cannot see it, feel it, or touch it. Surprisingly. But that's how it is in the world because not everything in the audit world is what we call tangible, something you can touch. Okay? The mood of an employee when you ask them a question, you can't touch the mood, but it sure is real. It's an intangible problem that the auditor needs to be keen enough to pick up and find a way to use that to the auditor's advantage. All right, thank you, Shaniko, again. Okay, that leaves us with Monique. You didn't read last week, did you?
No, I didn't.
Ah, Monique was the final culprit, I think, who didn't read last week. Okay, Monique, pick it up for us with tolerable error.
Okay, tolerable error. One, tolerable error is the maximum error in the population that the auditor would be willing to accept and still conclude that the result from the sample has achieved the audit objective. Tolerable error considered during the planning stage and for the substantive procedures is related to the auditor's judgments about materiality. The smaller the tolerable error, the greater the sample size will need to be.
Again, there you go, one more time. Remember, the tolerable error is that level of error that the auditor is required to accept without changing his position that everything is fine. Once you go over that level of the tolerable error level, then all of a sudden the auditor is a little nervous again. Like, wait a minute, you've gone over my tolerable level of error for some reason. I need to back up and make some adjustments to my audit plan. Okay? And of course, we're told one more time that the smaller or the lower the tolerable error is, the greater the sample needs to be. Why? Because the more you sample, the more likely you are to discover potential errors and frauds as opposed to if you have a very small sample, unless you have a whole lot of faith in a particular kind of business. So, question before she goes on. If the auditor goes to audit the church, big old Pentecostal modern day rich church. Because it's a church, should they pay less attention to the audit process?
No.
No,
No.
no. But people would believe or lead you to believe that because it's a church, that your tolerable error level should be low. But in fact, for some churches, you need to have it sky high. Because some churches are not doing things properly. And it has nothing to do with the building. It's just all about individuals as usual who decide to deviate from what they know is right. And as a result, the auditor has to take the same independent approach as he does with any other entity for obvious reasons. All right, keep going.
In tests of control, the tolerable error is the maximum rate of deviation from prescribed control procedure that the auditor would be willing to accept based on the preliminary assessment of control risk. In substantive procedures, the tolerable error is the maximum monetary error in an account balance or class of transactions that the auditor would be willing to accept so that when the results of all audit procedures are considered, the auditor is able to conclude with reasonable assurance that the financial statements are not materially misstated.
Yes. Before she goes on, so again, has anybody been able to come up with a meaning or an expression for materially misstated? Like, did that keep anybody up at night? And they're like, man, that's keeping me up. Materially misstated. What does that mean?
A lot of big errors.
Yeah, material means that the amount is significant for sure. And if it's misstated, it means that a significant amount is actually misstated. Yeah, I like that. Okay. She put it in very simple language. big errors. All right, big errors. Materially is the big side, and misstated are the errors, potentially. Okay, way to go. Who said that?
I did.
Monique. Monique is the culprit. All right, way to go. Okay, keep going.
Expected error. If the auditor expects error to be present in the population, a larger sample than when no error is expected ordinarily needs to be examined to conclude that the actual error in the population is not greater than the planned tolerable error. Smaller sample sizes are justified when the population is expected to be error-free. In determining the expected error in a population, the auditor would consider much matters as error levels identified in previous audits, changes in the entity's procedures, and evidence available from other procedures. Selection of the sample. The auditor should select sample items in such a way that the sample can be expected to be representative of the population. This requires that all items in the population have an opportunity of being selected. While there are a number of selection methods, 3 methods commonly used are random selection, which ensures that all items in the population have an equal chance of selection, for example, by use of random number tables.
Now remember, folks, this is not entirely abstract. When we talk about selections, we're talking about selecting transactions from the purchasing ledger or the purchasing transactions or the sales or the expenses or the liabilities or whatever it is that the auditor is checking within the company. That's all it means. Okay, so don't disconnect from what these populations are. They're really these accounting and financial and operational things that go on in a firm every day. Same stuff that you normally do. Okay, we just have like little fancy audit expressions like population, but it's really the whole of a particular area that is being audited, all the purchases area, all the sales area, all the cost of goods sold area, whatever it is they're looking at, all the HR files to see whether there's any HR hanky-panky going on, whatever's being audited. The population would be the whole of whatever is being audited. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, yeah, random selection.
Oh, I read that. Random selection, which ensures that all items from the population have an equal chance of selection, for example, by use of random number tables.
Okay.
Systematic selection, which involves selecting items using a constant interval between selections, the first interval having a random start. The interval might be based on a certain number of items, for example, every 20th voucher number, or on monetary totals, for example, every US 1,000 increase in the cumulative value of the population. When using systematic selection, the auditor would need to determine the population is not structured in such a manner that the sampling interval corresponds with a particular pattern in the population. For example, if in a population of branch sales, a particular branch sales occur only as every 100th item, and the sampling interval selected is 50, the result would be that the auditor would have selected all or none of the sales of that particular branch. Haphazard selection, which may be an acceptable alternative to random selection, provided the auditor attempts to draw a representative sample from the entire population with no intention to either include or exclude specific units. When the auditor uses this method, care needs to be taken to guard against making a selection that is biased. For example, towards items which are easily located, as they may not be representative. Evaluation of sample results. Having carried out on each sample item those audit procedures that are appropriate to the audit objective, the auditor should A, analyze any errors detected in the sample, B, project the errors found in the sample to the population, and C, reassess the sampling risk. analysis of errors in the sample. In analyzing the errors detected in the sample, the auditor will first need to determine that an item in question is in fact an error. In designing the sample, the auditor will have defined those conditions that constitute an error by reference to the audit objectives. For example, in a substantive procedure relating to the recording of accounts receivable, a misposting between customer accounts does not affect the total accounts receivable. Therefore, it may be appropriate to consider this an error in evaluating the sample results of this particular procedure, even though it may have an effect on other areas of the audit, such as the assessment of doubtful accounts. When the expected audit evidence regarding a specific sample item cannot be obtained, the auditor may be able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence through performing alternative procedures. For example, if a positive account receivable confirmation has been created and no reply was received, the auditor may be able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence that the receivable is valid by reviewing subsequent payments from the customer. If
Now,
the audit,
sorry, just to let you guys know, in this example, in this case, sometimes, for example, when the auditor comes in, and if you have what we call an accounts receivable ledger where person or persons owe your company money, the auditor's job is to verify that the total receivables owing to the company is $5 million. Let's say that's the balance owed by everyone, all your persons who owe you money. So the auditor wants to conduct a check to see whether or not this 5,000 in accounts receivable is correct. They typically would send letters out to the major persons who owe them significant amounts of money and see if there's a response coming back from those persons saying, yeah, I agree with that total law. No, I don't agree with that total law. I don't even have an account there. Okay, and so the auditor would do this in order to verify that the balances exist and that they are in fact correct. And what she's saying here in that little model in the middle is that if the auditor chooses not to send out letters to get a response from people who owe the company money, the auditor might look at other documentation, paperwork, transactions to verify the existence of those particular accounts that are owing to the company. I hope that kind of gives you a little insight into the auditor actually doing audit work in the real world. And this is just one of the many examples, samples that auditors use in order to get and collect sufficient audit evidence to make their decisions. Absolutely. Okay, keep going.
if the auditor does not or is unable to perform satisfactory alternative procedures, or if the procedures performed do not enable the auditor to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, the item would be treated as an error. The auditor would also consider the qualitative aspects of the error. These include the nature and cause of the error and the possible effect on the error on other phases of the audit. In analyzing the errors discovered, the auditor may observe that many have a common feature. For example, type of transaction, location, product line, or period. In such circumstances, the auditor may decide to identify all items in the population which possesses the common feature, thereby producing a subpopulation and extend audit procedures in this area. The auditor would then perform a separate analysis based on the items examined for 3 something subpopulation.
That's another typo.
That each?
Well, yeah, that could be okay. That's a good guess. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go with that. 3 each. Or is it for 3 such? For 3. You know what? We're gonna take that out completely and just say examine for 3 subpopulations. That's it. I don't know who tucked that in there. All right, 3 subpopulations. Number 1. Go ahead, Monique.
Sorry, I'm still muted.
Um,
For Projection of errors. The auditor projects the error results of the sample to the population from which the sample was selected. There are several acceptable methods of projecting errors results. However, in all the cases, the method of projection will need to be consistent with the method used to select the sampling unit. When projecting error results, the auditor needs to keep in mind the qualitative aspects of the errors found. When the population has been divided into subpopulations, the projection of errors is done separately for each subpopulation and the results are combined. Reassessing sampling risk. The auditor needs to consider whether errors in the population might exceed the tolerable error. To accomplish this, the auditor compares the projected population error to the tolerable error, taking into account the results of other audit procedures relevant to the specific control or financial statement assertion. The projected population error used for this comparison in the case of substantive procedures is net of adjustments made by the entity. When the projected error exceeds tolerable error, the auditor reassesses the sampling risk, and if that risk is unacceptable, would consider extending the audit procedure or performing alternative audit procedures.
Thank you very much, Monique, for reading through that hazardous bit of information. It's not something that you see in the daily paper for sure, but this is what we call auditing mumbo jumbo. And the truth of the matter is, even auditors in practice do not like to get to this level of error detection and error assessment unless they have absolutely no choice. As you can see, it does involve a lot of matrix from time to time in terms of getting sample size and testing them, and then coming up with what we call tolerable versus expected errors and so on, and trying to determine, okay, as we said in this case, if the expected error is, for example, greater than the tolerable error, then we have a problem, Houston, because we really do not typically want to get over our level of tolerance. Okay? If we say that our tolerable error percentage is 10%, and we start getting to 15 and 20%, the auditor is going to become concerned and go back into the population and say, meaning go back into the general ledger accounts or the operation or whatever they are auditing and say, wait a minute, we've exceeded our level of tolerance for errors in this area. We need to take a bigger sample of this particular population or activity, or worse still, given the nature of it, especially if it's cash related, they might even decide to do the unspeakable, and that is 100% testing. But you won't see 100% testing too often. Okay, that would be a decision that auditors will make if they have an asset, for example, as liquid as cash, that every time they check the cash transactions, they come up with an error. And so now the expected error goes way above what they were prepared to tolerate as a tolerable error. And they're saying, wait a minute, this sampling thing is not going to work for this one. We need to test 50%, 70%, 90%, or 100%, depending on the auditor's judgment call. See that word again? Judgment call. Now, some auditors are lazy and uninformed, and so they make poor judgment calls as to whether they should go through with it or not. Others are very keen and busy and interested in making the best decision, and those kinds of auditors will make a better judgment call. Because they're both auditors doesn't mean that they are both excellent at what they do. Remember, we have mechanics and we have mechanics, and we have mechanics. Some are good, some are bad, and some are ugly in the work they do. Same principle sometimes applies to people in the other professions, auditing included. Okay. All right. Now, what am I expecting from you guys for, especially for this last part when we talk about tolerable versus expected error? I just want you to know that those two types of errors exist. And by definition, you should be able to say what they are. And if I were to say to you, for example, if you want a lower risk level, you're gonna have to select a higher sample from the population. True or false? What would you say?
True.
Absolutely. So some persons understood some of this crazy stuff and by shouting behind it. Exactly. Okay. And so for this part of the exercise, those are the kinds of questions I am going to and likely to ask you. I would not say, for example, something like this. The projected population area used for this comparison in the case of substantive procedures is net of adjustments made by the entity. I wouldn't say, please explain the essence of that. I would not do that to you guys at this point because you're not here to be tied up in that area of matrix where even practicing auditors avoid every and any chance they could. Okay? A lot of them, when they run into that kind of decision making, they're like, are you kidding me? I need to go back and do research to see even how to do that. And furthermore, I'll make a judgment call and call it a day. And they move on. Okay. So not to worry. My questions are going to be very straightforward, like the examples I just gave in this particular area. Okay. All right. Any questions, anyone? Now, let me say this. Some persons are not here when I ask about whether you got your case study. Did everybody get the case study?
I got mine.
Okay, so I'll take that as a yes. Everybody has the case study. Does everybody remember when the case study is due?
Oh, no, before the 12th week, the last class.
Yeah, on or before the 12th week. Okay, the last day of class. On or before. Uh, at the end of the case study, I have some questions. Please don't answer me in 2 or 3 sentences and say, yay, I'm done. Remember, it's a research paper. So each of the questions requires you to do research into the body of the case itself for information, into your notes for information, into Google or any other engine you need to check with to build up the answer for each one of your questions. Okay? I'll be looking for complete and detailed answers. Am I looking for a right or wrong paper? No. I'm looking for a paper that is written to the best of your ability and that each question that you have to tackle, you tackle in as much detail as you can. So please, don't wait until the last minute. Do a little, after your examinations are done, do a little bit at a time until you get to the end so that you can do a more complete. Again, for those of you who are out of New Providence, please log on 15 minutes before your examination. If you run into any problems or issues, call the institute, call me, call somebody and say, hey, my exam is coming up. I'm not logged in, or whatever the case might be, I'm having a problem. All right, for those of you who are in New Providence, please report to the examination center at 6:15. So you have time to get in, relax, and be ready for your exam. When you're done passing your papers, those of you who are doing it virtually, email your answers and you should be good to go. Then we come back next week after the examination and pick up immediately with module number 5, which deals with, anybody knows?
Controls.
Yeah,
Internal control.
internal controls. But you're not going to worry about that now. Please go ahead and do your best preparation for your exam and let's get that behind us and then we can move forward. If you get stuck on something during your study, please send me a text or an email and I'll be happy to explain any information that you might be stuck on. Okay? Any other questions before we break? All right, wonderful. Good luck, and I'll see you guys next week, exam time. Take care, be safe, and remember, no pain, no gain. Put in your best study time and you will be happy with your results. All right, take care.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
Hi.
Bye-bye, good night.
Good night,
Bye.
all.
Good night.
Bye,
Mhm.
Leticia.
Bye. Good night.
Bye, good night.